time to forge the narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul Murphy, your host. We are the Bella Lost Souls podcast. This is episode 8th edition. That's what this is. That's what episode number this is. 8th edition. It is here. I'm joined tonight by Andrew Whitaker and Adam Abramowitz.
What's up, homies? New hammer is on the way.
And Chris Morgan.
Hey guys.
Welcome to the show. Real happy to have you all here. Even happier to be talking about this brand new day here for Warhammer 40k. This is a totally different game. I mentioned on the YouTube channel that by the time people heard this podcast, I would have already played a couple of games, and that has happened. And it is a completely different experience, but yet comfortable and familiar all at the same time.
It's a different game, but it's not.
Yeah, I would definitely say that in terms of their overall goal, I mean, a lot of people were very, very anxious, right? That there was going to be some extreme fundamental changes to this game, a la Age of Sigmar from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. This still feels very 40k. It just operates a little differently. It's the same car with a new engine.
I actually got to play a couple turns last week. I got to learn a little bit, but playing it fundamentally, it still felt like 40k. 100%, but it's different.
There are some things, of course, that we can expect. You're going to have two armies facing off against each other. You're going to have armies built on points. How you build your army now is it's way more, I guess, codified, I think, to where it will make future balancing of the game a lot easier, similar to how it is in Age of Sigmar, but they've gone a step further. Now when you select a unit, it comes with some mandatory standard equipment that you still have to pay points for, separately from the model. You buy the model and then you buy the war gear.
Which has it has its pluses and minuses, right? It's
mostly nice. Pluses. You just keep adding things and it gets more expensive.
I was so I think it's interesting. I think uniformly amongst list designers, at high level list designers, and even just kind of entrants to the game, it's kind of a pain in the butt, right? Like you have to flip through, find you get the unit entry, and then you find the unit point cost, and you say, well, this unit doesn't include its mandatory upgrades, so you have to add in the mandatory upgrades and the optional ones. It's some logistical hurdles. But I think for everyone listening, it's important to understand why Games Workshop did it this way, and why in the long run it's a good idea. First, once we have kind of software updates for all of the army building, the list building programs, whatever they are, whether the third-party ones, Army Builder, Battle Scribe, whatever, or whether what is Battle Scroll, Paul? That's the one for Age
Scroll Builder for Age
Scroll Builder.
Yeah,
exactly.
Builder.
So whether the company itself releases a list design program or whether you use a third party one, the logistical hurdle of finding the point costs of whatever your unit is will be done away with. I think once you can just click a button. That's number one. Number two is the way they've set it up is kind of ingenious in that it's very easy to create rolling point cost updates for particular units because the unit entry is disassociated from the point costs.
And you'd be updating maybe one page of a book instead of the whole book and have it be something. If I can point out something here, going to the craft world point values, a fire dragon is 7 points. So you see that first off, you're like, I can dig this. Give me a smooth 100 fire dragons, please.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you go over to the fusion gun, and it is 17 points. So you add those two things together, and that gives you your point cost for one fire dragon. And then you see that the minimum unit size is X, and that's what determines your points for the unit.
Right. Now I've got a Lehman Russ battle tank or a tank commander that comes in at 125 points. And then I need to buy the hull-mounted heavy bolter and then the turret weapon of my choice and then the sponson weapons of my choice.
Because this stuff is mandatory. It says on the data slate now that this Lehman Russ comes with the battle cannon and 2 side sponson heavy bolters or whatever. You've got to manually put that together to get your value.
Exactly. And you have to buy it. It's some logistical hurdles to actually do the list design.
Well, it's unfamiliar. Let me just say it's not a hurdle, it's unfamiliar. And once you become comfortable with this and kind of understand the process, because that's what you're really doing, you're just retraining your mind on the process.
I feel like back in the day, Paul, though, 1998, let's take us back almost 20 years ago when I was building a Wood Elf army with a codex and a piece of paper. This is how I did it.
First and second edition, you were rolling randomly for your stats. Your initiative was D4 +2 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it does seem it's not the kind of just rote entry points and unit statistics all rolled into a single page comprehensive understanding. It's a flipping back and forth type situation. And right now, all we have is leaks. Obviously, on when our audience is hearing this episode, they should have the books in front of them. But whether you're operating on books or God forbid, internet leaks, there's a lot of flipping back and forth, and that's what I mean by logistical hurdle. It's a physical, like tangible. I have to move my hands between the unit entry.
Andrew's got a real good point here. I mean, speaking as a document designer myself, looking at the way that they've organized this, it raised a couple eyebrows for me at first until I realized the fluidity of updating that system. Kind of like what Paul was mentioning earlier. You put all the stuff in the one page that needs to change, and keeping that stuff, like say a unit entry isolated, allows a lot greater freedom for someone who was looking to make changes in the future. And I think that it's going to be okay as soon as people get used to it. I remember even in 3rd edition having to physically pay for frag and crack grenades for a tactical marine. I mean, people will adapt to it. And for the beer and pretzels, the beginners that you're worried about, the people just getting into the game, that's what power level is all about.
Yeah, and I think Chris has hit the nail on the head, right? It's an eyebrow raise from like a logistical, physical, flipping the pages design standpoint. But when you understand why it's done this way, a competitive player should be just thumbs up and smiles, because this is the best way for GW to have set up the book so that future updates are fluid, easy, and have the minimal impact on the books themselves. So I'm all about it. It's fine. I totally understand that as soon as Battlescribe updates, it'll just be a couple of clicks on my iPad,
it's also
and I'll be back to list designing.
It's also something you can explain to someone one time how to do. And that makes an entry into the game a little bit easier also. Like, this is how you build a unit. Knock yourself out.
What I really like about it is that I've read a lot of, reviews from people on the internet saying Games Workshop is oversimplifying the game because we don't have the expansive rule sets that we get to manipulate and play with. I disagree. I mean, I think that it is simplified to an extent. I think the true tactician is going to be the one that's sitting there and actually writing down the rules and looking in and writing down the numbers and breaking down the points and finding out how to make it most efficient, because you're looking at a spreadsheet now and not just an army builder. That's my take.
This game has not been simplified at all as far as the complexity of playing the game. The game and how you approach it, the kind of the ticky-tack interaction between things on the table, the way terrain works, the way models interact and move and stuff, that's all been changed. And that, I think, is for the better, because it all leads to more complex generalship. You're not going to have so many trip-ups on rules, I think, anymore with, I didn't know you could do that, or whatever.
Amen.
Almost everything behaves the same. Units and models behave the same no matter what type of model that they are. And I think that is a huge step in the right direction, and will set up people to be able to showcase their generalship better than their army design, that whatever they're taking the hottest new detachment or whatever it was.
Preach.
What I would... absolutely. I agree with Adam there. The thing that I would say that GW has put a points premium on in terms of match play is choice, player choice. They've given you greater flexibility and basically a bigger toolbox to choose from, but you pay a points premium for that. And I think that for all those people that were worried that the game was going to become too simple and that list building was going to be easy and that the rules are going to be dumbed down, like, there is still some very, very complicated nuance to the way that you build your list, where you prioritize your points, and how you operate with those on the table. Just being able to choose, right, when a unit that comes in from reserves arrives on the table and where, just that by itself it's super clutch.
It definitely benefits the good tactician.
With the army, choosing an army and whatever. Now, our show is mostly focused on match play. Can we at least agree on that? And that's probably going to be where most of our takes, as we discuss and digest this system, goes.
That's pretty much the environment where I find the most other people to play with.
Well, I think there's a big portion of the rulebook that's dedicated to match play. But right in the beginning of the section here, in the choosing an army section, it mentions that you might want to take a look at how many detachments you include for the point level. And I thought that was interesting as more of a guideline. And they even mentioned this is a guideline for tournament organizers to possibly utilize to help balance the game. And I forget which one of you did it, but you mentioned power levels earlier. And I think
that was me. Yeah.
One of those things, it's a good point because we are writing off the power levels as we look at points. But the power level is a good way for tournament organizers to possibly, I don't want to say limit or restrict, but craft their environment for their tournaments.
Absolutely. If you want to run a more narrative tournament or you want to limit the shenanigans that we, are bound to happen.
Yeah, and I don't know what to make all of that yet, and I think that's going to take some time to really kind of move forward. And I'm also not saying put arbitrary limits on things either. I'm just saying that is a tool. And right here in the rule book, it mentions that organized event guidelines, that if you're playing with 2,000 points, then maybe you should consider limiting that to 3 detachments.
I thought that was a must-have. That wasn't a recommendation.
It also goes on to say, do it your own way. It's your event or whatever, which I also encourage.
So I thought it was limit 3 on the detachments. Maybe I'm just misreading it or something, or misunderstanding. But limit 3 on the detachments. I mean, honestly,
let me just read what it says, just so we have a kind of a frame of reference here. If you're using match play for an organized event, such as a tournament, we suggest using the table below as a helpful guideline. Of course, if you're organizing such an event, you should feel free to modify these guidelines to better suit your event's own needs, schedule, etc. And it says for 1,001 to 2,000 points, up to 3 detachments per army, play it on a 6x4 table, allow 2 to 3 hours per game.
So
interesting.
Like you said, presumptively. So that's our show. We're talking about match play. Presumptively, that's how it's going to operate. Obviously for me, ATC is on the horizon, playing 8th edition, 2,000 points. That's what's going to happen. 3 detachments doesn't seem like too much to me, especially in light of the fact that the points cost across the board seem to have gone more or less through the roof.
Well, there's some very enterprising people out there online, and this is what I love the internet for. I mean, you could just basically ask it any question and you get an answer. And sometimes it's right? But they put together these spreadsheets, essentially a heat map of things that are less expensive compared to things that are more expensive. And you would be surprised. You need to share that with
me right now.
You would be surprised at how many things are less expensive. Now, obviously, some of the winners from the previous edition are more expensive, or some of the top performers are more expensive, and some of the weaker performers are less expensive. But that's not always the case.
For example, a Riptide or a Wraith Knight, Imperial Knight are more expensive.
Points.
It's 9,700,000 to be specific, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Typhus is about 5 points. He might be 10.
maybe 10. Drop pods went from 35 to 105.
That's going to be a subject. We're going to probably talk at length about when and how and why to use a drop pod. It's not going to be right now, but that's it.
No,
but your point, I don't want to lose your point. I don't want to get too far off your point. Your point was that 3 detachments may be enough because points are what they are.
Yeah, I think because of the way the points breakdown works in this game, and I call it this game because it almost feels like a different game as much as it does a different edition. But in 8th, the points feels like so much more the upper limit than the detachments do. I mean, you look at most of the detachments, patrol detachment notwithstanding, you need at least 2 HQ choices. Well, most of the HQ choices are over 100 points. So just off the top, to get to 3 detachments, you're spending 600 to 800 points just in HQ choices. That's just not tenable. Like, if I understand list designers are going to disagree, and there's always fringe cases, but more so than ever before, it's not the detachments that are deciding what's going to get played with. It's the actual raw points limits. And I think
it's the biggest separation from 7th edition, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's having to actually count your points, correct?
Yeah.
Whereas previously, I've got this Space Wolf detachment that I can take, 2 elites. I can take 2 13-point servitor choices and then get however many HQ choices. You could get 4, 5, 6, 7 detachments under 1,500 points relatively easily in 7th Ed. those days.
I've made this clear.
Let-
I made this
Hang on
clear.
one second. Let me jump in there real quick. I want to back to the war gear section. With that points, and you're talking about buying cheap people, you have to buy. I don't want it to be lost that you have to buy whatever their standard war gear is. So you couldn't, for instance, have a bunch of unarmed guardians running around. You'd have to buy their shuriken catapults or whatever. And some of the stuff is 0 points, but don't let that get lost. You can't, you have to buy whatever the minimum equipment is that needs to be purchased for every unit.
Yeah. For those that haven't seen the leaks or don't have the book in hand, typically a bolt pistol or a bolt gun or a chainsword is going to be 0 points. That's the stuff that you have to take for a Space Marine. They're easy to call out. It's going to be 0 points. Big winner, in my opinion, Power Sword's 4 points. To put that into perspective. A Power Fist
so
is 25. You have to pay for it. Think about, like, Dreadnought's a great example, in my opinion, because typically you used to buy the Dreadnought and it came with a Stormbolter and a Heavy Flamer. And you could pay 10 points for a Stormbolter and a Melt-A-Gun, or 20 points or 15 points for a Heavy Flamer and a Melt-A-Gun. Now today, you buy the sarcophagus body, you pay for the Stormbolter, you pay for the Heavy Flamer or the Melt-A-Gun, you also pay for both of the fists, not just one. 40 points for one fist, 50 points if you're going to double up. And then Blood Talons, if you're playing Blood Angels, are a totally different point cost. It's a completely new structure to how you equip your models. I like it. I think it's great.
I don't want to talk about the detachments too. We're talking about the detachment limit I shouldn't say limit. I don't even want to use the word limit. I want to play with completely unabridged 8th edition 40k for as long as possible.
It's a great time for a fresh start like that.
Until there is truly a need and a demand for something different. But I think there's going to be a lot of play in what we're going to talk about next. The stratagems, command points, and the detachments. The command points that you get, you get a number assigned to you based on the detachments that you take. Certain detachments give you a certain amount of command points, 1, 2, or 3. There's even one in here that takes away one of your command points.
And that's an interesting. I really love this. Can we just talk about this for a real quick second, Paul? Because I think it's a really genius game design list building from Games Workshop. If you want to sub in something, and this is going back to like making Unbound more realistic, in my opinion, is if you just want to put a unit in your army that doesn't fit within the guidelines that you have, you can do that now without breaking anything, without having to take an HQ, but you're going to take a penalty in your command structure, your command point structure. So you're going to get one less opportunity to use a stratagem. I think that is genius on Games Workshop's part.
I think it's a good give and take. It really is a good give and take.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Paul. Sorry for sidetracking us there.
No, that's perfect point. The stratagems that we saw up in the article on the Warhammer community site, the 3 there were the reroll a die, counteroffensive, and what was the other one? Insane bravery, I think it was.
Like insane heroism or something like that.
Morale or something like that.
That third one is, I believe, going to be one of the biggest, most valuable things in the game, but that's my sleeper pick for the most valuable stratagem.
Look, I'll give you that, but let me tell you that after playing a game, that all 3 of these are great, and that was the least used. Now, but I have morale modifiers in the army, but let me tell you why on the other stuff. Let me actually tell you why the points on these matter. The reroll is 1 point, the counteroffensive is 2 points, and then the insane bravery is 2 points.
And I think that's something that people, those of us that have been looking at the leaks, didn't really realize. We just figured it was 1 point, but some of these command points have different point structures.
Yeah, and it's going to be, and they're on missions, like in some of the narrative missions and in the different mission structures, like a Maelstrom mission, then there's different stratagems included there to help enhance that play. But here, when let's say you take something that's actually attainable here, and that's the battalion detachment that has a minimum of 2 HQs and 3 troops. It gives you 3 command points. And then say you want to go over and you want to splurge on Dante, Mephiston, and a Sanguinary Priest, and so you want to take the Supreme Command Detachment. That's a lot of points I just spent, and it only gave me 1 more command point. So now I'm coming into the game rocking only 4 command points.
You get.
So remember, you start with 3.
Yeah, you start with 3, so you're actually at 7, Paul.
Yep, sorry, 4 additional command points. My apologies.
So every army starts with 3 if you're doing a battle-forged army.
Sorry for not mentioning that. And then these things being 2 points apiece, 1 point apiece. Now the only restriction is that you can't duplicate the same one in the same turn. So you couldn't do 2 insane braveries or 2 counteroffensives. But with that amount of points, you can see how you could easily burn through these in the first 2 or 3 turns of the game.
And correct me, Paul, like, this isn't something that you're not selecting what you're using before the game. It's not like a warlord trait or a psychic power. It's something that you just have to choose from.
Yeah,
it's at your disposal
you fire
at the
it off
beginning
when
of the
you
game.
need it. Yeah, you fire it off when you need it.
Right.
I will say, newsflash, I got married, bought a house, went on a honeymoon, blah, blah, blah. In the background, I've been paying attention to this, so I haven't had kind of a voice to share my perception of it. But one of the big things that I have thought at the whole transition from 7th to 8th is that, and it's not unique to me, it's that GW has very intentionally streamlined and simplified the game. They did away with armor values. They did away with line of sight from sponson weapons, right? So vehicles now shoot like monstrous creatures did in 7th edition. Little things like that change the whole function of units, change the whole flow of games, blah, blah, blah. Whatever your thoughts and kind of perception of that is, couch that for just a second. I want to hone on these stratagems because I think that as simplified as the game may have been or may be, or how intentional GW
I think
has
streamlined is a better way of saying it.
Streamlined
is a
Because
much
everything
better way.
behaves
Yeah.
similarly, so there's less confusion. But go ahead.
Yeah, so no, however streamlined the game may be, and how, if you don't believe that streamlining the game is a good thing, these stratagems have this big, incredibly vast tactical avenue for players to become commanders of. When to use these stratagems, when to burn a command point, which stratagem to use on which units at which time on which turn is huge. It is a massive new avenue of tactics, and what will set apart good players from great players and bad players from good players are going to be how they use these stratagems.
I think what you're trying to get across is that it's a new mechanic that a commander can master.
Yes,
and
it's a new mechanic that is going to offset any downside of streamlining. Is going to be offset by this new mechanic.
It's giving the generalship back, man. I'm telling you, I'm a run hot kind of guy. I want to tell you that I'm an advocate of burning all your command points in the first 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah, I think if you're finishing the game, Paul and I were talking about this earlier. I think if you finish the game with any left over, then you're doing it wrong. And
absolutely.
I can't wait to see what the faction-specific ones end up turning out like, and the more that we see as the game progresses. I love that dynamic. I mean, Paul and I were talking about, because there's that limit, right? You have to be over 9 inches away when you set up a model from Deep Strike. You have to be over 9 inches away from an enemy model. Now,
take that reroll.
Take the reroll, right? And knowing when to do it. So if it's 9 inches and you roll 2 dice and one's a 4 and the other's a 4, you're probably not going to want to use the reroll then, because you need a 5 or a 6 to make that happen, right? But if you roll a 6 or roll a 5, one of those, that's a good opportunity to roll that one die.
Up, to 80% or something like that, or whatever. I mean, it's don't quote me on that number. It's a high number. It's worth it. Is what I'm saying.
Chris, maybe your tactic was to deploy a bunch of very difficult to kill models first, and your stuff that was going to kill everything else is going to come down turn 3 because you get to choose now. But you weren't so lucky turns 1 and turns 2, and turns 3 you really need that killy unit to come down and kill a bunch of stuff. Even if you rolled a 4 and a 3. You really need that reroll. If you held on to it and you still have it, you got to take that chance now, or else the game's over for you, right? You've lost the game. You have no chance of progressing in the tournament environment.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we're seeing here is the way that HQ and support HQs operate has a decidedly more powerful impact on your ability to use some of these types of strategies.
The counteroffensive, how it reads, this stratagem is used right after an enemy unit that charge has fought. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. This doesn't sound on paper as amazing as it is. And
can you walk me through it, because it's confusing as you read it? It is an extremely confusing rule.
Assault is pretty big in this game. The way things assault, the movement, the speed in which things can get across the table in Assault. Let's also remember there's no restrictions on assaulting anymore. It's like, there used to be, you can't assault if you do this, you can never assault if you do that. Assault, you have to punch yourself in the face before you can assault. That's essentially how it felt in 7th edition. In 8th, there are no restrictions. If you're within 12 inches, you can try to launch an assault. The reason that I'm bringing this counteroffensive up is because, let's say you get multi-charged by 3 or 4 different units. It's way easier to multi-charge now than it ever has been, than it's been in a very long time. Probably ever has been. It's easier to multi-assault because you don't have to worry about closest model, this. I mean, there's so many things you just don't have to worry about anymore. You have to worry about it happening to you, but you don't have to worry about it while you're being the assaulter. But with this thing, you activate a unit, essentially. I don't know what the right terminology is, but you activate the unit and then they fight. So let's say an enemy has charged you with 4 different units. Without something like this, they're going to be able to fight with every single one of those units. With something like this, one of those units gets to fight, and then you burn the counteroffensive to let one of your units fight. So you could possibly take the wind out of the sails of a big assault unit that just hit you after one of the fights has already occurred.
Yeah, and it's going to make, knowing that your opponent has that tool in their toolbox, assuming that they built a list that would give, or they had enough remaining, your timing for your assaults can be completely affected by that. The unit that you decide, all right, I have 4 units to charge this turn. He's got the ability to gank one of them. The one that's going to do the most work needs to happen first. And knowing which unit that is and making the right call on that can make or break your assault that turn.
Your opponent has to, this may be what you were saying, but your opponent has to really say, to also choose wisely which one of his units he activates first. Did that make sense?
One more time.
You lost me a little bit there, Paul, yeah.
The opponent, he's going to get to choose which one of his units he activates first. So he needs to pick correct. Otherwise, you trigger off the counteroffensive, possibly taking the heat out, all the power out of one of the units that hasn't activated yet, because you're going to want to burn your fight on a unit that hasn't already done its damage to you.
There's no doubt that this counter assault one is low key, is sneaky the most important, or is sneaky the most manipulable. Like the great players will use this really well. Because it's going to be one of those
sides. Sorry, I want to cut you off, but it works on both sides. It's like you almost want to bait your opponent into using it and not boning yourself at the same time.
Well, no, it's certainly. I mean, it's one of those things. Like, wow, I've set up my. It's turn 2. I've moved my units, and they have survived. They've withered my opponent's shooting on turn 1, and I've got this master multi-assault plan where I can engage 3 or 4 units. Well, it all hinges on these guys assaulting first and swinging, and then me getting to activate this other unit over here first. Well, I now have this, what if he burns his stratagem and activates this unit first? It's a whole layer of decision making. Obviously, I have been harping on this for a year and a half on the show. Decision points, decision points, decision points. The stratagems add a layer of decision points and target prioritization. Whether it's re-rolling your assault range or, Paul, I think you have rightly fingered this particular rule, this particular stratagem as low-key very important. If it gets used properly, will become a serious tournament tactic that can win people games.
You'll turn the tide.
You will turn the tide.
It's also, I also think it's one of those that there's a lot to process, so you have to be intelligent about it, because if you can't figure it out, it's not to your benefit. Don't use it if you don't understand it, like me. It's going to take me a while to understand this.
You're going to want this one with some Death Company. Let me tell you, you're going to want it.
No, yeah. And I'm going to be reading the rule over and over again and playtesting the crap out of this in the few weeks that we have coming up to ATC. But this is not one that if you don't know what you're doing, you want to mess around with. It can be. I feel like it's a high risk, high reward scenario. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, there's going to be some trial by fire involved with that for sure.
It absolutely is, and it's funny too because Chris, you mentioned trial by fire. That term, and I think what is usually associated with, oh man, the burned hand learns best, right? Like, oh, I messed this up this one time, I'm going to get it right the next time. I think that's not the case with the stratagem. This is one of those things that you can mess up every single game because of the way the activation. It's going to be one of those things like, oh no, I really need a firm grasp of sequencing, target prioritization, and order of operation. And that's a tough thing to master.
Let me go over just a few of these detachments here, because there's flexibility. And now we mentioned, I know we were talking about that you run out of points before you ran out of detachments or options or whatever, and that's going to be the truth. I mentioned the Supreme Command Detachment. That allows you to take 3 to 5 HQs with no other requirement, with a 3 mandatory.
It also allows you to take a Lord of War, right?
You can
Is
take
this
an
the one
elite
that
choice.
allows you the one?
You can take an elite choice, or a Lord of War choice. They're both 0-1. The Spearhead Detachment, I can see this getting some play. It has a 1 HQ mandatory and 3 to 6 heavies mandatory, and then everything else is optional. And it has a wide range of things open. Lord of War slots are not open in this, but all the other what you consider a standard force organization chart is available to you if you take the Spearhead Detachment. And I think we'll see people that are taking them to get just the 3 heavies or whatever. But I wanted to point out that if you had yourself, you couldn't afford the HQ tax, you couldn't afford the HQ tax from another detachment, you probably still had some of that flexibility left over within some of these larger detachments that are available to you. The Outrider detachment's a fast attack.
So I have a question for you, and I think maybe we should preface this. Unless I'm absolutely incorrect, there's no such thing as OBSEC in this game anymore.
There is no OBSEC.
There's no drawback to not. Yeah, there's no drawback to not taking troops.
No OBSEC.
And nobody has to be salty about not getting it on their battle companies. I don't know who that would be. Right. But
we talked about this after the Knights article got spoiled on the community site. But the super heavy detachment is just 5 Lords of War with 3 mandatory.
But correct me if I'm wrong, based on how points are working, at 2,000 points, if that's the new 1850, there's no way we're fitting 5 Knights at 2,000, unless I'm wrong.
I don't.
Not without. I mean, I think you could. I think they would all be choppy knights, though. I don't think you'd see a lot of the guns on them.
Gauntlet, sword, melt-a-gun, maybe at the most. But the fact that it's there, I mean, we know that this is for the Knights, but this could also be 5 Wraith Knights. It could be 5 Storm Surges. It could be 5 anything. I don't know what it could be. 5 Baneblades. That is not going to fit in 2,000 points. But you get what I'm saying. That is, if you wanted to play,
it cannot be 5. It can't be 5 Brute Guillimans, though.
It cannot. It cannot.
They actually have it expressively written. I saw it this morning. He can only be taken once per army. Thank you for making that clear to us. But
just hearing like the super unique character names, obviously with the new game, it's just like everybody has new rules. All of the potential is blown out. It's like everything has new rules and new excitement and new utilization. And it's just like, man, we need a whole show dedicated to named characters in 40K, because
that's a good
some of
topic.
them.
We should probably do a bonus episode on that.
I would love to do a bonus episode.
Lamartes, please.
Well,
I'm all about Lemmy.
And So Lamartes and Asterath went through the roof. Dante, it would be a fun
still
episode.
like Dante.
I don't think he's awful.
I still love Dante, but he's like not what he was competitive.
You know who I love though, Andrew?
Who?
Mephiston.
Oh, dude, I'm right there with you, dude.
Mephiston's so good.
Meph was Fuego in 6th edition, garbage in 7th, and then back to Fuego again in 8th.
In my game that I played, I took Lamartes, Dante, and Mephiston.
That is a triumvirate worthy of it. Obviously, we all play other factions. I formerly a Black Templar player.
What we do, I think that's actually a good idea, Andrew. We will have a full episode devoted to special characters, and we'll probably break them down by faction. I think that's a really nice way to do it, and possibly, so if anyone has any army ideas out there that they are itching to try with these characters, that maybe you've always loved the model or the story behind the character. But it just hasn't been, historically great in a couple of editions. Maybe it's time to break them out again.
And importantly, I
haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, it's important to say that we're not going to pull punches either. We'll be honest about what we think about them. A bunch of these changes have been phenomenally positive. We're all very excited about 8th edition. But some of the characters, we can be honest about how we think they'll turn out. And
efficiency. Well, we chase efficiency.
Exactly.
As match play tournament players, we're going to chase that efficiency. And we'll talk about that. We'll save that for when we actually get into it. I also want to point out while we're still on the subject of detachments, the only way that I can see to get fortifications is in the fortification detachment.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
So all these every single one of these cool buildings has rules and stuff to it, or will have rules and stuff to it if it doesn't already. And the only way to incorporate them into your army is with a now, granted, you only need one, and that's you only need to have the detachment slot, and one's the minimum, but it has up to 3. So,
but you don't. I believe that the fortification network or detachment doesn't provide you a command point.
It does not. It gives you no command points. It has no restrictions and no command benefits.
Right. It's something to consider. I mean, like, I love the ebb and flow, the give and take, the risk reward factor and how you're building your armies now. I don't think there's going to be as much min-maxing. I think it's hard to do, or at least it's harder to do.
Well, we don't immediately see that efficiency we were talking about in everything right now. Right. There's some standout stuff we'll talk about. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. I think I'll grab Ricky also, and then we'll talk about a little bit, again, more as much as we can fit into this few minute show, but way more to come on this, guys. Please stand by.
Righteous.
FTN is brought to you by Bell of Lost Souls. Check out www.bols.org for the best daily hobby articles on the web.
Hey everybody, we are back. I'm still Paul. I got Chris Morgan and picked up Ricky Addington.
Oh man,
I snuck in.
I hear you've been being like salty, man. You need to chill out. Settle down with that attitude. Andrew Whitaker and Adam Abramowitz.
What up, homies?
Y'all, I was a Primaris Space Marine before Primaris Space Marines were cool.
So
hipster Primaris.
We've been kind of looking at, I don't want to say a surface level, but we're talking about some of the biggest changes in 8th edition 40k. And I know that people are going to, by the time they hear this, going to be able to see some of the books in stores, and stuff's going to be up for pre-order on the Games Workshop site and in your local store. I mean, the stuff, it's great. This is, in my opinion, the game is going to be much better because it's going to be, again, focused more on the general side of things and less on than just the army choices. And I think that we're going to get to the point to where we have to spend a lot more time choosing what we take and how it all slots in. And then, whatever, it's going to evolve over time as an efficient, whatever. I've said enough about it. Generalship's going to be rewarded. But there are some, what I consider some big winners, and the units, they were traditionally, let's say, unsuccessful, not well revered. I don't know what the best way.
Look at this politically correct Paul. Be like, hey man, there's some stuff that used to really suck, and now it's
wasn't optimized.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't optimized.
There weren't optimal choices, and I'm going to list mine first, and I'll let everybody get a shot here of. And this is not going to be now. Look, I want to say that we can all agree. Don't say anything, Ricky. That Mephiston is the best. So he's obviously
Mephiston. Yeah. No, I figured someone was going to get to him before I did, and I already kind of spoiled it in the earlier segment. So I've got something else on.
We're not going to talk about Mephiston in this segment here. But I'm going to come from way downtown and say the Imperial Guard Sentinel with a las cannon.
That's a good one, Paul.
That's a sleeper pick of excellent proportions. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that this guy is going to find his way onto many a tabletop simply for the efficiency of being able to take a 55, 60 point, if I think if you take the armor transport, somebody correct me on the points, with a las cannon for having all that it does, because the las cannon, killing vehicles is a lot harder in this edition than it was before. I know I'm only speaking anecdotal from a small sample size, but I think what we're used to doing is that if you charge a vehicle with a unit of 10 close combat Space Marines that happen to be Death Company in this situation, if you were to charge 3 rhinos or something, 3 vehicles almost of any type in 7th edition, those Death Company were going to beat down the vehicles, and that was it. Now, the troops inside were going to get out and murder you because you were inefficient, but that you were at least getting rid of the vehicles. Yeah. you were at least getting rid of the vehicles. That doesn't happen anymore. You got vehicles with excess 13, 12 wounds, and these are like typical vehicles. So
I sent a Land Raider for 2 turns, and then I ended up charging it with Terminators today against a Rhino. It took 2 turns of Land Raider shooting and a charge from Deathwing Terminators to kill a Rhino. So definitely worth it.
Well, that's why I'm saying that the vehicle here, the Sentinel with the las cannon doing what, D6 wounds?
Yep.
And then, it's hitting on a 4+ whatever, but it's a cheap body to get it. And this thing is what, T7 5 wounds or T7 6 wounds, something like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up.
Yeah, it's T5 6 wounds.
T5, 6 wounds, 55 points or whatever, I believe. And I'll get the exact point here in a second, or Ricky will. For a las cannon body.
Yeah, it's certainly a las cannons are real good, no question about that. Sentinels are very survivable. They're inexpensive. The Scout Sentinels are also very good options. You know, I think that the apex kind of 90th percentile list designer is leading the way on deciding whether or not the Scout Sentinel is better than the Armored Sentinel. It's a 5-point difference for the Armored Sentinel. They have a 3+ save as opposed to a 4+ save. But then the Scout Sentinel has some deployment shenanigans, and then also has a 1-inch better movement. So you have good choices either way. If you're pinching pennies, there's no poor choice there. But I certainly agree with Paul that given the proclivity of las cannons to be way better in this edition of the game than previously, that single shot las cannons are now actually going to be really, really good.
Yeah, 55 points for the Scout Sentinel, and I think it's 5 extra points for the Armored Sentinel.
Exactly. So it's a 5-point difference. Again, the difference being 1 inch of movement and 1 better armor save. The reality is that a single las cannon can do 6 damage. That is a problem, and it has to be addressed. And so if I show up to the table with 2, 3, 4 Sentinels, you can't just let me linger around in the backfield popping off with las cannons.
The 8-inch move on the Armored Sentinels, let's just go with that for a second. The 8-inch move on an Armored Sentinel plus a 48-inch range, what is that, 56 inches of threat range?
Yeah. And then the Scout Sentinel moves 9, so you're looking at 57 inches. Not to mention their deployment options, right? Because they have the kind of the new quasi-infiltrate option. So yes, they have phenomenal move and strike capacity, and las cannons are a real problem. So I definitely agree with Paul. I'm the proud owner of 6 Sentinels, and they will all be equipped with las cannons the next time that Whitaker hits the table. Rest assured with that. So I totally agree with Paul. Armored Sentinels with las cannons are the new hotness. You heard it here first.
Chris, what's your pick here?
Well, my pick, of course, is going to come from my favorite army. But I am super hot on the Sanguinary Guard and all their varieties. Most particularly with the Sanguinary Guard Ancient.
Hit me with your knowledge,
That's
Morgan.
the single character elite choice. This is the Ancients are really big now in the Space Marines. They get characters that, and remember, characters can't join units, so they're their own independent, ultimate, how do you say, singular unit model? I don't know, whatever. I almost call them independent characters, but I don't want to confuse anybody. But they're their separate unit of one model.
Right.
Well, that's the funny thing is that they're not called independent characters. Like they were independent characters, but they could join units before. But now they're not independent characters, but they can't join units. So it's
and they're more independent than ever.
Right. Yeah. So the ultimus independus.
Yep. My thing with Sanguinary Guard is this. I feel like with the extra wound that they got, that makes them more survivable. I think that with the banner on the Ancient, the fact that it lets you ignore all negative morale tests, like you never have to take a morale test if you're close enough to this thing, I think that's going to be a really big deal. I know, and They Shall Know No Fear gives you a reroll on that roll, but when you're taking some of those losses and you want to really preserve those units, especially when there's modifiers to that sort of thing going around, a la, say, Night Lords or what fear used to be and how Marines aren't immune to that anymore, I think that this Ancient is going to do a really good job. The weapons now doing multiple damage. The way that they combo with some of the other characters, you could use the Psychic Power to give a squad of Sanguinary Guard a 4+ invulnerable save. You have the +1 strength from the radius of the Sanguinary Priest. Like there's synergies built into this unit that makes it scarier than it was in previous editions. And yes, you're paying a little bit more on points, but it does more now.
Doubly survivable, right? You went from 1 wound a model to 2.
Well, and
I don't mind.
The Ancient has 4 wounds.
Yeah, well, certainly for the Ancient, but people were like, Sanguinary Guard went from 33 points a model to 44 points a model. I'm like, yeah, but we got 2 wounds. So
we got 2 wounds, and now we're doing D3 damage on all of our weapons.
And
we're hitting on 3s.
Precision landing on the deep strike and potential for re-rolling assault rolls on a 9 to assault at a deep strike. So all in all, I definitely agree that Sanguinary Guard are pretty great. So
They're much better than they were. Before, it was kind of like you had the Golden Host, and that was the only gimmick that these guys worked in, right? Now there's more. Now I feel like they can do more.
Going back to what you're saying about the Ancient, though, like that's one of the first takeaways I saw in my preliminary reading. I was like, I need to find a way to make this guy fit into a list. But there are other ways. It's my only challenge. I think there's other ways to kind of give off the same effect, whether it be a sanguinary priest or a chaplain, or there's other characters that do a very similar thing. But if you need somebody who's not a named character that can do great work for...
that dude is an elite choice, so he fits into almost every detachment.
Yeah, exactly.
Even
I think
if you
that's
take
the
the supremacy detachment, the command supremacy detachment, it still gets an elite option. You can take that dude.
Good call, Paul.
I think he's an excellent support character.
100%.
Yeah, he can take a death mass too, so he can debuff your enemy's morale while he's around, as well as strengthening your own. And even with the death mask and an Encarmine sword, he's 99 points.
That's
how many attacks does he have, Paul?
3
Remind
attacks,
me.
I believe.
I think it's 3 or 4 attacks.
On the one dude, right?
Yeah, just the one guy.
So hold on, I have a question for you. So he can take a death mass, and death mass does now -1 to your morale test or whatever it is. Is that correct?
To an enemy's morale test if they're within a certain distance of it.
That's pretty potent. I think we all know that morale is going to be a big make or break for the game. I mean, there's so much, if only because there's so much or so many rules that have to do with morale, either debuffing or buffing it, that it's obviously got to play a big part.
I need to get in the habit of remembering this. Sorry, Chris, to cut you off. I need to get in the habit of remembering this, is that he has 3 base attacks, and the pistol or whatever doesn't give you an extra attack anymore. That's something that you got to train your brain to be different.
But you can still shoot it in your shooting phase if you're locked in combat, which is also
also you need to remember to do that. So.
Well, so but I think Paul's onto the point where very often everyone wishes like, oh man, I wish that I could shoot my pistol in close combat or blah blah blah. But like the reality is, I'd rather have +1 attack on my Encarmine sword that does D3 damage than having 1 pistol shot in the shooting phase.
I don't know, if it's an Infernus pistol, if we're talking Blood Angels here,
sure, certainly weapon upgrades are what they are. Yeah. But oftentimes close combat weapons do more damage than their comparably priced range combat equivalents.
Back to this guy's support side too, is that friendly Blood Angels within units within 6 inches of the Blood Angels chapter banner do not need to take morale test and reroll wound rolls of 1 in the fight phase.
That is good.
So extra layer of buff there. And remember, guys, that the Glaven Carmine, as we knew it in 7th and prior, was a 2-handed weapon, so you never got the bonus attack anyways. So it's not like you've lost anything by not having an Angelus bolt gun.
That's a good point.
He also gets the Heirs of Ascalon that he rerolls. Same thing the Sanguinary Guard get. He rerolls failed hit rolls for this model if it's within 6 inches of the Blood Angel Warlord, or of a Blood Angel Warlord is what it says. And why wouldn't he be right next to Dante?
Yep. And Dante's great just because, and I love these character combinations. It's like this big tree of epic that you can pull off. And these characters are still safe if you're deploying smart. But, you get Dante, who lets you reroll all failed to hit for everybody within range of that aura. So you've got hitting on 3s with a reroll, and then you're wounding. If you're comboing it right, you're going to be probably strength 5 with a priest around there, because it's not like he's going to scatter outside of the distance, right? It's not like he's not going to be close at hand. So you've got this guy who's giving you a +1 to your strength, which means that now for Imperial Knights, which are toughness 8, you're doing your multiple damage wounds on 5s instead of 6s.
Sweet.
Which is 17% increase. It's a big deal.
Adam, what you got?
The single unit that I think got the best boost in the Marines Codex was the Scout Biker. It's still relatively affordable in comparison. It moves 16 inches now.
Base?
And I believe it has 2 wounds. So 16 inches with 2 wounds. If you want to talk about, smash and grab objective score, why wouldn't you go there? That's my take. I was looking at things to substitute for objective holders, and previously it was drop pods, but they're getting more expensive.
A scout bike squad does have 16 inches of movement and does have 2 wounds apiece. Let me also point out why that 16-inch movement can be big, is that now you cannot target characters unless you have a special role to do so, unless they are the closest model. With this ability to move 16 inches, you can cover an impressive amount of distance and still fire all your weapons. You're not giving up anything to move that far.
Yep.
That would be good too if you had a character who was get ready to get killed. 16 inches, turbo boost 6 more, and get into position to screen for a character you can't drop.
And what?
And let them soak it up.
You're talking about acting as a shield, yeah. And turbo, that's a rule. So when this unit advances, add 6 inches to its move characteristic for that movement phase instead of rolling a die. So you get, 22 inches of movement?
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, no rolling at all.
What did we take Scout Bikers for in the past edition for the past 2 years?
We did.
That was an excellent setup for that comment, Adam.
It was an excellent setup, but people that took them, they took them for locator beacons. That's it.
I think you took them if you didn't have any other choice. That was the only case.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, that brings me to teleport homers. I love the way teleport homers work now.
It is a fascinating rule. Teleport homers are going to be one of those things that are low-key, sneaky, super important, and are going to get utilized in really tricky ways. So teleport homers are these really cool. It's fantastic, and they're going to be super well utilized, and it is a it's going to be really fascinating to see how top-end players take advantage of this ability. But essentially what they do is, in layman's terms, beginning of a movement phase, you may relocate a unit with a teleport homer. So at the beginning of the game, you deploy the teleport homer somewhere in your deployment zone. And then you can, in subsequent turns, relocate a unit to where that teleport homer is in your deployment zone. Which means if I put my teleport homer in my deployment zone, and then on turn 2 I deep strike my Terminators. They shoot, they assault, they do whatever they want. Turn 3, they move, they shoot, they assault, they do whatever they want. Turn 4, I can then relocate my Terminators back into my deployment zone where they can again shoot, assault, and do whatever they want. It's basically like a built-in 15-point upgrade for Gate of Infinity to a fixed location.
So who can take a teleport homer in 8th edition?
So shooting. So all variants of Terminators can take teleport homers. So whether it's shooting Terminators, assault Terminators, that's a big deal. I think they're available to certain of the Primaris units.
Let me read what it does, if you don't mind, before you get to this. If this unit has a teleport homer, place it anywhere in your deployment zone when your army deploys. If an enemy model is ever within 9 inches of the teleport homer, it is deactivated and removed from the battlefield. That's important. That's why I wanted to read this here. Whilst there are any friendly chapter teleport homers on the battlefield, this unit can perform an emergency teleport instead of moving in its movement phase. At the end of the movement phase, remove this unit and then set it up with all models within 6 inches of a friendly chapter teleport homer. This teleport homer is then removed from the battlefield.
So, until you said those few keywords, within 9 inches, it goes away. I was going to say every army should have this that can take it.
I just wanted to put it out there because it is strong, and this will be played with. I agree with you.
What is the point cost on it? Is it 0? Let's also notice something that wasn't said there, right? It doesn't say you may set up anywhere within 6 inches of the teleport homer, but more than 9 inches away from an enemy. So you could teleport out, and if they aren't close enough to deactivate the thing, you could actually get off an easier charge than if these guys had deep struck and tried to charge something earlier.
That is a spectacular point.
You catch them going for it. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. If a unit ends up, say, 14 inches from your teleport homer, well, now I can take my Terminators, which were on the other end of the board, and then relocate them. And now I need to pull off a 5-inch assault. And I can burn a stratagem point to reroll one of my dice or something like that. It becomes a humongously productive, flexible redeployment tool.
The teleport homer is 0 points.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
so why would you not always take one on your Terminator squads? And it doesn't say that you can't be in combat, does it? I didn't hear anything about that when you said
I
that,
read
right,
the
Paul?
full thing. I don't remember saying that, but I'll check again.
Okay, because say your Terminators are out of position and in a bad spot. Say it's close to the end of the game. Put this thing close to an objective. Zip, end of the game, bam, scouring, whatever. You've got a unit that can travel the entire distance. You know, like say, for example, I was toying with the idea today of having Terminators in a Land Raider Crusader. Say I get out and I'm done with everything and the opponent has moved to the opposite end of the field. It's like, all right, well, that was great. You've got this awesome killer unit over here, but come and get me. And you're like, zap, and here I am. Like, now you still have to deal with these. That was one of the biggest problems with Terminators is once you put them down on the table, anybody or their dog can
and it's
outrun
got to
them.
be an enemy. It's got to be a model too. Like I think you would have to model the teleport Homer and put it down there. So it
There's one that comes in the Terminator
I
kit.
know, I get that, but I want to make that clear. You're not putting a counter down or a token. You're putting a model down, so things still can't deep strike within 9 inches of that model.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and maybe perhaps an open question as to whether or not your teleport Homer counts as a model that would prohibit your opponent from deep striking within it. But whether it is or isn't, I don't think debases the underlying point of that Chris
good.
made. Yeah, it's good, and Chris's point is well made in that, you know, Terminators, whether they were the shooty variety, which have been terrible forever, and that was the unit of choice that I was going to talk about. But whether it's shooty Terminators or assaulty Terminators, they now have a tool that allows them to move across the battlefield at a rapid pace, redeploy, and make sure that they're effective.
You have to put it in your deployment zone, so you're going back, but that's still a valid thing. It's you could put your close combat Terminators, charge them across the table, rip across a couple Lehman Russes, and then jump back and get rid of somebody's Tempestus Scions or whatever.
That almost makes it better
exactly.
because if you're putting it in your deployment zone, it allows you to go, you know, early on, turn 1 or turn 2, whenever you want to deep strike them into your opponent's backfield. Fight something, kill something back there, eliminate that threat, and then scoot away. So you can put your weight of force on the front end of the battlefield and then escape to the back end and claim that home objective. If you're like, I'm thinking Relic or Emperor's Will or something like that.
We're getting a little into the weeds, but I like it. So who wants to claim this teleport Homer as their sleeper item?
I already did mine, so I can't.
I can't claim the teleport Homer as their sleeper item.
Wait, no, we can all claim it because this was supposed to be a topic about sleeper units.
Exactly. So group consensus. The Forge the Narrative cast has a podcast.
As Dean's
was
teleport
pretty-
Homers are pretty
as
good.
Deep Teleport Homers are
All
pretty darn
in
good.
favor say aye.
As
Aye.
democratic as I get, right?
There you go.
The worst part is, though, it's not even like the Terminator Squad is the sleeper unit. It's literally the teleport Homer,
The piece
which
of
is
plastic
which
thrown in the
is
trash for 10 years.
yeah, that
Oh, I
people
kept
were
'em.
cutting up and using as objective markers and stuff, and now that has become the sleeper hit of 8th edition. So
I want to hear what Andrea has to say about shooty Terminators. I'm very interested to see if it lines up with my assessment.
Only is that your pick, or
Well,
shooting Terminator is going to be your pick?
So Paul, ever the intrepid host that you are, you've nipped it in the bud. I have 2 units that were my sleeper picks. And you shocked me, bud. Shockingly, I know, right? I love the sound of my own voice. I want to talk about 2 units, but shooty Terminators, I think, are going to be fantastic. I think that the teleport Homer is great. I think Power Fists are so strong. And I think that the capacity to be with the 2 wounds, the 2+ armor save, the 5+ invuln, and the basically parallel of points costing is great. That was my 45 seconds of saying that's not my unit. My unit of
But correct
sleeper-
statements, nonetheless, I think.
Correct statements nonetheless, and I think that we'll talk about them in future shows for sure. My sleeper unit of choice is going to be the double ranged combat Dreadnought. I want everyone to think back to 5th edition. It was the year of our Lord 2012. The Grey Knights Seifel Dreadnought was the beat stick unit of choice. I think it was that was actually the first time that I met Paul Murphy. Was in 2012. I think 2011 was that ATC where we played you guys in round 1. My team played Paul's team in round 1, and Grey Knights were the king in the castle, and the double autocannon rifle dread was king. That was a long time
It was,
ago.
like 140 points or something, and you couldn't kill it very well, and it put out
Couldn't
8
kill it
shots
very-
at strength 8.
It put out 8 shots at strength 8, and it was real good. Well, lo and behold, nothing new is under the sun. That's biblical, and it's back because maybe not the Grey Knight Stifle Dread, but if you're gonna play a ranged combat style Space Marines army, the double shooty Dreadnought is gonna be very, very, very good, and here's why. Number one. Autocannons are base 2 damage. They're AP -1 and 2 damage. It doesn't take a mathematician to tell you that base damage 2 is better than D3 damage, right? If you reliable damage settings or reliable
Guaranteed. We talked about
numbers,
this today.
Exactly.
And that's why I like the Storm Strike missiles better now.
Exactly right. Guaranteed numbers are better than variables. They're just across the board more reliable. And a Dreadnought is really, really strong. They're T7, are they 6 wounds or 7 wounds?
Hold on, I got it right here.
I believe there's 7 wounds.
The venerable
Sentinel is
8.
6 wounds. I hope, yeah.
They're 8.
They're 8
8
wounds,
wounds.
Ricky.
Yep.
Oh, 8 wounds.
So you're looking at T7, 8 wounds, just for your run-of-the-mill standard Dreadnought. T7, 8 wounds, and to take a double autocannon or a double missile launcher, which I think there's good arguments to be made for both, you're still sub 160 points to take the double shooty Dreadnoughts.
Can I interrupt you 1 second here?
Of course.
You're saying the Rifleman Dread, but can I see your point and just go ahead and give you my choice, which was the Venerable Dreadnought, and then you stole my thunder, so I'm a little mad. But remember, if you go Venerable on this thing, Andrew, you're hitting on 2s.
A heavy shooting emphasis Dreadnought army is going to be so strong.
It'll be brutal.
The double autocannon Dreadnought is 8 shots at 3 pluses to hit at strength 7, doing 2 damage per and -1 AP. That is going to tear vehicles apart. You could be a Land Raider and it doesn't matter. For a couple of 150 point Dreadnoughts, I can take a Land Raider apart. Imperial Knights, it might take a couple of turns, but I'll turn those things into glue at 2 damage apiece and strength 7, -1 AP. It is very, very strong, very, very cost efficient, and I think that Dreadnoughts are going to see this massive resurgence.
They will. And I am a firm believer that you just go ahead and pay for the Venerable, because here's the thing. Now that Dreadnoughts have 8 wounds, toughness 7, so most stuff is going to have a really hard time getting anything better than a 4 to wound it. You're going to have to use dedicated anti-tank weaponry, and at best you're getting a 3-up to do anything against it. It's got a 3-up
Dreadnoughts
base.
aren't hard to hide and cover either. I mean,
yeah. With the new rules, 50%. A
It
Dreadnought.
depends on what tournament you're playing at, Paul.
Sure. Listen,
Yeah.
The profile of the model is not,
Yeah.
it's not a knight, it's not a Land Raider, it's not a, whatever. You get what I'm saying.
I played 2 games today. My buddy was playing Grey Knights. He didn't have enough points to get up to where I was on my army. I loaned him 3 of my old dual autocannon Dreadnoughts. So it was kind of funny that Andrew started talking about this, because I was right there with him when he was talking about it, because it was the standout unit of the game. We put 3 Venerable Dreadnoughts with dual autocannons, and I couldn't do anything against it. He
crushed you. I'm sure he blew you apart. It's unbelievable.
3-up save base, and then, oh, hey, I got a wound through, and he's like, oh, wait, well, let me just roll and see if I get a 6 here. Every wound you take, doesn't matter if it's a wound, mortal wound, or what, unyielding ancient, you on a 6, you roll a d6 for every wound you take that goes through the armor. So after you fail your armor save, you get another chance, 6-up, to save that. It's huge. And then you're going to be sitting way downtown, 48 inches away, popping people with a strength 7 shot, 8 strength 7 shots for a very low price. I mean, it's
I think
what's
I think that if you're taking the Venerables, you're putting money into better ballistic skill and the Undying Ancient. But whether you take the Bone Stock Dreadnought, the economic option, or the Venerable, like, you're super survivable and you're very destructive. I mean, guaranteed 2 damage on 8 shots at strength 7. You're basically, I mean, on average, what is that? With 8 shots hitting on 3s, that's 5 hits. That's basically like 4 to 6 damage against strength 8 targets across the board. Like, that's wild. Mathematically, it's very, very, very strong.
What out there is going to be able to get rid of this thing by turn 2?
Las cannons.
That's
you know,
it.
a good las cannon shot.
That's right.
Yeah.
What aren't those las cannons killing when you've got 4 of them in your army?
Exactly.
The other 3?
And here's the thing, don't take all venerables, don't take all normals. Put a couple of venerables in front of your regular dreadnoughts and let them, screen. You can move those venerables up and keep your cheaper, weaker ones back in the backfield. You still got 48-inch range, and you can put your venerables up a little closer, maybe do something with. But, dude, Andrew is not wrong in any way. Dust off the dreadnoughts, because I know every one of y'all have about an inch layer of dust on every dreadnought you have.
I may be looking at 3 right now.
I will say, Alan, I think this is interesting because we were talking during the break, and actually during the pre-show, Paul and I were, about how there's been it is an apparent. It's so obvious, and it's almost overstated at how Games Workshop has made it a concerted effort to take units that were not played with, underpowered, not good, openly disparaged,
And make them playable again.
And making them playable, not overpowered, not the kind of prototypical Eldar overreaction where, like, oh, we took this thing and we made it so good that it's an auto-include. No, they've taken units and made them playable.
They didn't overcompensate. It's not like they went out and bought the Ferrari. They got the Porsche 911.
Yeah,
I'm starting to call that the power weapon effect.
Yeah.
Because, essentially that's what it is, right? You have 3 more or less good options to choose from.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. And I think that, it's we could have a whole extra bonus episode show about all the things that, like, hey, these are the units that were really terrible and now they're pretty good. But, like, basilisks, Lehman Russ tanks, land raiders, predators, and almost every variety of predator.
I'm loving the Taka Pred, the Bale Predator.
The Bale Predator is super strong. I think Lehman Russ tanks are going to make this huge resurgence. I mean, all of the old artillery units for Imperial Guard, the Basilisk, the Wyvern, the Manticore, the Death Strike, the Earthshakers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've kind of had this big resurgence. Not so much that they're auto-includes, like, oh, wow.
It's a fresh look. They're worth a look to see if they fit into the strategy of your army.
Exactly right.
I'm just excited for Astra Militarum players because those purists who refuse to go naked on the side sponsons for Lehman Russes, those guys who are like, I don't care, I'm paying the points and putting those awesome-looking side sponsons on their Lehman Russes, which makes those tanks look amazing, and now they get to shoot it all. And
at whatever they want.
Yeah, my 7-year-old son, he had the old Forge World, Lehman Russ army, the tank army. So his whole army is tanks, and it's all Lehman Russes with side sponsons. I keep telling him, like, you don't know how good your army's going to be now, and he's so excited. However, let me just put this in here. He and I played. My last game of 7th edition was with my son, and we pulled out 3 Lehman Russes apiece, and we went at it on the table, and he beat me. So he is now running through the house on the entire family that he is the king of Warhammer.
Oh,
so just so y'all know,
make him a crown.
The king of Warhammer lives in my house.
That's great.
Now, I know we've talked a lot about Imperial stuff this episode because, guys, we're obviously Imperial players, and there's a lot of interest in the war gear and how it's changed and whatever. This is something, next episode, I promise you, we're going to cover all Xenos.
Do we have
to? You got to do a fair amount of reading before you can do that.
Yeah, there's a lot to look into. I mean, the amount of data that we have to sift through is staggering. So hold tight because we are going to do it. It's just, of course, we're going to go over our favorites first.
Well, this is when you get 5 every army at once. Now, I know this is just the get you by stuff until we get some codexes and battle tomes or whatever they're going to be called, but it's a lot of info. But it's really nice to see the fresh kind of look at some of this stuff, but the overhaul. It's basically an overhaul of all of these things to really try to give it a place. Guys, I really appreciate y'all going over this initial look of the books, the rule book, and the army indexes as we have them. Can't wait to start playing more games. We'll have more to talk about. I want to hear y'all's experiences too. As you see this in your game stores, let us know what your impressions of these things are. What are the standout units for you? Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good rest of y'all's night.
Buenos noches.
Sanguine Sword.
Bilal, most improved player.
Thanks for listening.